Young Thug is scheduled to appear in court today in Georgia on gang-related charges. The rapper, whose real name is Jeffrey Lamar Williams, was one of 28 people named in an indictment in that state. He's charged with conspiracy to violate the state's RICO Act and participation in criminal street gang activity. The indictment also includes fellow rapper Gunna, whose real name is Sergio Giovanni Kitchens.
What's going on, everyone? This is Scott Grubman, and welcome to episode 2 of the Crime and Punishment podcast. I'm real excited about this episode because I am interviewing the one and only Doug Weinstein. For those of you who have been living under a rock for the last year and a half, Doug Weinstein is one of the lawyers that we have seen day in and day out in the ongoing YSL RICO trial down here in Fulton County. So this is the case, of course, against Young Thug, Jeffrey Williams, and his co-defendants. One of those co-defendants being Diamante Kendrick, aka Yak Gotti. He's a co-defendant of Mr. Williams. He was one of Mr. Williams' record label mates on the YSL record label. Doug Weinstein is his attorney. He has been fighting the good fight with the Fulton County DA's office day in and day out. So I really appreciate him taking the time out of his busy schedule to come talk to us. So let's get right into it.
Communicating in ways that are not appropriate.
Well, you know, the problem, Your Honor, is that since this was an ex parte meeting that should probably have never taken place, you were not there, I was not there, my fellow outside agitators weren't there, we don't have a video of it, so I have no idea specifically if that was not referred to us. We don't know, do we? We don't know. And what I do know is that I have been arguing with people for 18 months that Chief Judge Glanville was doing his best, that he was trying to rule to the best of his ability based on the evidence and the law before him, and now I have been made to look like an idiot.
Welcome, everyone. I want to welcome Doug Weinstein. It is my pleasure to welcome Doug. For all of us who have spent countless hours when we should have been working, looking at Twitter, looking at YouTube, looking at Instagram, trying to figure out what's going on in the YSL case. Well, Doug Weinstein, that's been his life for over a year now. So it's so great to have Doug. Doug represents one of the defendants in the YSL Fulton County Young Thug case, as it's been called. He represents a defendant named Yak Gotti, real name Diamante Kendrick. Doug, thank you so much. Welcome to the second episode of my podcast.
Wow, it's my pleasure, my honor to be on the second episode of your podcast. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, it's my honor to have you. And not only did I want to thank you for being on, and I'm not trying to sound too corny, but on behalf of all the defense lawyers, I also wanted to thank you and your co-defense counsel for everything you've been doing in this case. I cannot imagine every single day having to sit through this case. We're all sitting on the sidelines watching, frustrated, and what you are doing, putting the rest of your practice and your life on hold to represent your client's interests is just real impressive. So thank you for that. We're watching you, we're cheering you on.
That's a kind thing, and thank you. And thank you everyone for your support. The public, the criminal, GACTL, the criminal defense attorneys around Georgia, and even the attorneys around the U.S. who pitch in and provide support, and we really appreciate it.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that you guys are getting a lot of support worldwide. You're definitely getting a lot of followers. I follow you on Twitter. I think your Twitter handle is Doug Weinstein. Not very clever, but easy for people to find you. So if they want to follow you on there, I highly recommend it. I do. I know you go back and forth a lot with some of the folks who have been following the case, including Thugger Daily and some of those accounts. So tell us a little bit before we get into the case, Doug, about your background. Is it true, I believe it is, that up until relatively recently, you were a civil lawyer and that criminal is a relatively new thing for you?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I practice exclusively civil litigation, 99% of it in the intellectual property area. So generally in federal court all across the US for about 23 years. So it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that I've begun to do criminal law. So it has some overlap. Some of the courtroom skills are similar, but obviously a lot of differences. And in some ways, I'm thrown in the deep end with this case, but it's a great way to learn is to be thrown in and to have these amazing criminal defense attorneys around me that I can learn from, that support me, and I know can backstop me. So I think it's a great way to do it in this circumstance. So I'm very lucky. But yeah, basically, I'm a patent litigator by training.
That's absolutely incredible. When I read that on your bio, I was surprised and pleasantly surprised because you've been doing such a great job. I know you have lots of trial and litigation experience, but like you said, criminal law is different. And I also agree 100%. You have some great co-defense counsel. I mean, Bruce Harvey's in there, Brian Steele, of course, other great defense counsel, Max Shart and others. So definitely a great team. So can you tell us a little bit about we all talk about Young Thug, aka Jeffrey Williams. He's kind of the lead defendant, if you will. At least that's the way he's been portrayed in the media in the YSL case. But let's not forget there are quite a few other defendants in this case, one of them being your client, Diamante Kendrick, aka Yak Gotti. Can you tell us a little bit about your client, a little bit about his background, and what charges he's facing in this case?
Sure. A little bit about his background because I think it's very interesting. He was a football star at Grady High School and was all set to go, I believe, to the University of Georgia on scholarship. He was like a safety or a cornerback, defensive back, and that ended up getting derailed a little bit. So he was friends with Jeffrey Williams, and Jeffrey Williams, like he did with a lot of people that he knew, encouraged Diamante Kendrick to get into rap music. And so, yeah, he has gotten into that. And as a matter of fact, people ask me, sometimes they'll see him over there. When he's in court, when things aren't going on that directly relate to him, he will be sitting next to me, writing lyrics. So he's a prolific writer. He's taught me a lot. I don't really know anything about rap music before this case. And he's taught me a lot about it, some of the conventions of the genre, what particular skills are valued when you're doing lyrics. So anyway, it's been very interesting. And you can't sit next to someone every weekday for coming on 2 years and not develop a bond with them. So I feel very close to him. And so that's why when people say you're passionate, in many ways, it's become very personal for me.
I appreciate that. I was sitting here trying to think about what might rhyme with Weinstein.
That's a
I know
tough one.
Jeffrey Williams has rhymed Brian Steele with a couple of things. So I'm sure there are some words that he could figure out to rhyme with Weinstein. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I've obviously read the indictment previously. I reviewed it kind of quickly again in connection with this interview, but I believe your client is charged with RICO and then also charged in relation to the murder of Donovan Thomas, who also went by Nut. Is that a summary of the charges against your client accurate?
Yeah, yeah, it's the RICO charge that pretty much all 28 of the people named in the indictment are charged with. Then he's also charged, as you said, with the murder of Donovan Thomas. He's alleged to be the driver of the car that was involved in the drive-by shooting. And then he has a number of charges related to when the police effectuated the arrest of Jeffrey Williams at Jeffrey Williams' home because Diamante Kendrick was there And the police, I guess they found some guns there, some drugs there. And so they have hit my client with charges related to that as well. So I kind of put them in three buckets: the RICO, the murder, and then the items they found incident to arrest.
Got it. Now, I'm going to start with a very broad, open-ended question and then break it down a little bit. But to start with a really broad, open-ended question about the specifics of the trial, how do you think it's going so far? You've been in the courtroom for over a year and a half. You've been with a jury for over 9 months, I guess, give or take. How do you think it's going?
You know, it's so hard to have perspective on things when you're sitting there. And I feel like my views are biased by being there. But so far, it feels like things are going our way sitting in the courtroom. Um, I will say the jury's paying attention for the most part to this testimony. But for example, let's just talk about the murder of Donovan Thomas and the witnesses the state has presented. I mean, the state's superstar witness, I think for the whole case, I mean, for the entire indictment, not just the murder of Donovan Thomas, was, Kenneth Copeland, Woody. And I think if you'd ask anybody that watched this, or even from the state, if they were being candid, I don't believe his testimony went the way the state was counting on. And that's really in keeping with almost all of the state's witnesses who have really not testified in court the way the state was perhaps expecting, perhaps counting on. And so I don't see any, way the jury could find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt so far. Now, they have another 100 witnesses. I don't think they'll ever be able to show that. But I don't think the case is going well for the state. You can tell me what you think, but I don't think it's going well.
Well, I'm probably obviously not as biased as you being in the courtroom and being one of the attorneys, but I'm pretty biased. I will say I 100% agree. I do not think the case is going well for the prosecution. I think up until the situation with Woody, who for everyone, I'm sure you've seen at least the clips that went viral on social media. Woody is the witness who was there for quite a while on the stand, wound up resulting in a change of judges, really put the case on an international platform. I laughed when you said you didn't think it went as planned by the state, because that probably could win the understatement of the century. That was just an absolute complete disaster. And the other witnesses don't seem to have gone much better. So what I saw in terms of the publicity that this case is getting, me and my immediate circle, because we're criminal defense lawyers, because as you can see from the artwork behind me, I am actually a very big fan of this genre of music, and I've been a big fan of YSL for quite some time. We were paying attention to this case. When the Woody situation came up, when the Judge Glanville situation came up, which ultimately led to him being kicked off the case and a new judge being assigned, this case went from really big to the biggest thing in the world, probably until Puff Daddy wound up getting indicted. It took over a little bit of the energy, but up to that point, it was the biggest case going on in the world, and it really still is. From just a perspective of just an attorney, particularly someone who hasn't been practicing in criminal law all that long, how have you dealt with that? And had there been, I know there have been upsides, but have there also been downsides to this level of publicity?
I don't feel like there's been really any downsides to the publicity. I was saying yesterday on another podcast that I think that the people that are writing all these letters to the judges, while their heart is totally in the right place, I don't know that that's helping our case, just because of the natural inclination of humans to kind of get their back up. Again, I mean, I don't want to repeat everything I said yesterday, but I understand where it's coming from. I appreciate their efforts. I think it could be directed in a better way. Um, that's the only real downside I could see to the publicity. Um, as far as, um, for example, my Twitter feed and such, I, I, I have a lot of experience as a teacher. I love to teach. When I lived in Taiwan for 10 years, I was an adjunct professor the entire time I was there. Um, I've taught here as well. So it's really I guess my biggest love is teaching. But so I've just tried to use this as an opportunity to educate the public too. And I've enjoyed the interaction with people. And I have thick skin, so people don't like what I have to say or get upset with me, or they beat up on the quality of my cross at times. It's perfectly fine. It really doesn't faze me. And maybe it's also age. I just do my thing and I move on.
Well, not only that, because again, I follow you on Twitter, you actually solicit the feedback. And I could tell that you're appreciative of what people are saying, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral, and that you might even incorporate that feedback the next day at trial. So,
I mean, I've done that at least, yeah, I had done that at least one time, and I can't remember what it was, but I guess I was soliciting questions on cross to a particular witness, if you recall that. And I got I got quite a number of suggestions, and there were a couple that worked their way into my cross that I had not thought of. So I'm all for crowdsourcing. I'll tell you the other thing that has happened is when I was really doing all the work on the recusal, the disqualification of Judge Glanville, there were people that reached out and did legal research and sent me legal research that was very helpful because while we have three people in the firm, and Katie Hingerty provided a lot of help also on that motion to disqualify, who's a phenomenal lawyer at both the trial and the appellate level. Mostly it's just me a lot of times. So all that additional help, I don't have a team of associates, I don't have a giant staff, was very helpful. So the publicity, this kind of crowdsourcing, I think it's all been great.
That's great. I just smile thinking what Miss Love might say if she were on this podcast and I asked her how she felt about the publicity she's received thus far. Speaking of, and not singling her out, but just generally talking about what has been witnessed in the courtroom and noted by the judge, which just from the judge's own words have been a lack of preparedness and a lack of desire to follow the rules by the prosecution, especially with your background as a civil litigator. Has that been something that has surprised you? I know this isn't your words, but I'm going to call the lack of ethics that has been demonstrated by the Fulton County District Attorney's Office throughout the course of this trial thus far?
Well, those are your words, not mine, right? But it's interesting, and I don't think people appreciate this, and maybe people that don't do civil and criminal like I do don't see it. But civil actually tends to be more, what's the word? There's more friction between the parties, between the attorneys in civil than I have seen in criminal. Like most of the time, the relationship that I've had with prosecutors, and I've seen others have with prosecutors, is very civil, courteous, professional relationship. When I started out as a civil litigator doing patent law, patent litigation, the patent litigation bar was a very small bar, and it was very civil. But as the large general practice firms got into it, that became less so. So the civil litigation can be much rougher. So anyway, the dealings I've had with the state in this case, and this is what I tell people on Twitter, this is not the norm in criminal litigation from what I can tell. And it's not all the prosecutors, it's pretty much just the one. For example, I'll give you an example. I just left right before I came on with you. I left a Zoom call between a couple of prosecutors from the state on this case and the criminal defense attorneys, and it was cordial and friendly and professional at working on resolving issues. And that just has not been the case with one particular prosecutor in this case. And it's a shame. And it's what the judge said from the bench. This case would be much easier on everybody if the lead prosecutor would just act in a more transparent manner.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think this is a very important case. Of course, an extremely important case for all of the defendants who are at trial and being held without bond for so long, but also an important case to really instill confidence in the public in our criminal justice system at a time, particularly where it seems like confidence in our legal system generally is at an all-time low. This is a case where everyone's watching. And so it seems like such a great opportunity for the Fulton County District Attorney's Office to open everything up and to say, look, we are transparent. We do things the right way. And I'll just say it's very unfortunate from my perspective that the District Attorney's Office, and like you said, in particular, one member of the District Attorney's Office in particular involved in this case, doesn't seem to want to do that. So speaking of judges, we had Judge Glanville. We all know what happened there. No more Judge Glanville. So we'll move on from Judge Glanville. We now have Judge Paige Whitaker. Judge Whitaker has come up to speed very quickly. She seems to be moving this case along at least better than it was before she became involved. It also is apparent that she has certain views of the state's case, the way they're presenting their case, and that she has not hesitated to let those views be known. Generally speaking, how do you think Judge Whitaker's doing? Are you happy with her as a judge thus far? And do you think she is going to move this case along quicker than the prior judge did?
Yeah, I'm very happy with Judge Whitaker. I don't know that we could have drawn much better than her when we got a new judge here. She has, I think she has done a really good job on her evidentiary rulings. Obviously, we don't agree with them all. I have done everything that I can to push the court to require the state to move in a more deliberate and expeditious fashion. Some of that seems to be having some effect. I had a day last week where, for example, I think I raised 23 or 24 403 objections for waste of time on a Monday morning, and 20 or 21 of those were sustained. So that's a significant improvement. There's a lot of things that are happening now that under Judge Glanville would never have happened. And I think Judge Whitaker, just in her own words, is getting to the point where she's going to require the state to move a little faster. She's not yet where I've asked her to get, which is to put a clock on the state's total remaining witnesses. But she has indicated that for certain witnesses, she may say, hey, you've got 1 hour with this witness, 2 hours with this witness. And she has pushed as much as possible. Well, no, not as much as possible. She has pushed for the states, to move a little faster on their questioning of witnesses. So I'm going to continue to apply pressure, and hopefully we'll get there. And again, this is because my client is locked up. Because honestly, again, real quick, I don't think it serves the state's interest to move so slowly. Honestly, I don't think it does. They're plotting. You can see the jurors begin to tune out. I don't think it helps them with their case. So in that sense, it kind of works against me maybe to force them to move faster. But my client's locked up. If he was out on bond and they wanted to spend 3 years, slowly, painfully going through their case, then that's fine. But that's not the circumstance.
When did your client get arrested?
May of 2022, the same time as Jeffrey Williams was arrested when they went to his home.
So you're talking about going on 2.5 years. And like, just for everyone's knowledge, and just like you said, Doug, these folks have been held without bond since they got arrested almost 2.5 years ago. It's not for the lack of trying. I know that Doug and the other lawyers have been in front of judges time and time again, seeking bond. Thus far, that has not been successful, despite the fact, based on what I remember, that the defendants, at least the main defendant, Mr. Williams, and probably the other defendants as well, offered a very strong bond package for themselves, to basically say, look, if you let us out, we'll be in our house, we'll be on house arrest, we'll be subject to 24/7 monitoring that we ourselves pay for. The state doesn't have to pay for any of it. And thus far, the judges have said no. So here's my question to you, Doug. Now that you have a new judge, and now that the new judge continues to see what a waste of time so much of the state's case is, do you think there's hope of her reconsidering the denial of bond at some point in the foreseeable future?
I thought there was hope when we all filed, or several of us filed renewed bond motions when she first took over the case. But when I saw her reject Jeffrey Williams' motion for bond, as you said, we had all those restrictions on it. And he's not charged with the murder, for example, and she rejected that. I didn't withdraw the motion, but I asked for it to be held. When the right opportunity presents itself, which I suspect it will, I will renew that motion for bond. But I don't think she's there yet. But I'm more than looking forward to doing it again at the right opportunity.
And obviously, I know you don't agree with the denial of bond, but to help us better understand what the judge is thinking there, at least from the judge's perspective, because I go back to last episode that I did with Amanda Clark Palmer, where we talked about the Diddy indictment and the fact that, very similar to what I just described, Puff Daddy's legal team offered an extremely strong bond package with millions of dollars of cash bond, around the clock monitoring, and then also this idea of this person is very famous, and it's extremely unlikely that they're going to flee somewhere where they're not going to be able to be brought back for trial, which of course is one of the main purposes of bond. Well, to a large extent, to the same extent, really, you can say the same about at least some of the defendants, if not all of the defendants in the YSL case. So when Judge Whitaker denied Mr. Williams' renewed motion for bond, can you walk us through her reasoning on that and what the state was arguing to get that bond denied?
Now, I may not be recalling it totally, but if I'm recalling correctly, I believe the main reason for denying that bond was an alleged threat to intimidate witnesses. I believe that was the basis that she used. But, if I remember what Brian Steele was offering, it was cutting off all communications. Basically, Jeffrey Williams would be imprisoned within his home. So given all of that, I don't know how he could possibly intimidate witnesses. So I didn't agree with her. And I think part of her reasoning, she has, what I've noticed over the past couple of months, she is very reluctant to revisit any rulings that Judge Glanville made. And a perfect example of that is with retired Sergeant Gaither. The state requested that retired Sergeant Gaither not be shown on video in their list that they submit each week. And then I guess one of my roles seems to be in the courtroom that I object to that. Whenever they give the list of witnesses to not be shown, with a few exceptions where I can see that there may be some merit to it, I object to that. So I objected to Gaither not being shown because the state, I don't believe, could meet their burden of showing that there was some potential threat to Gaither from her being shown on video. And I think the judge was kind of leaning my way until just basically Ms. Love argued, well, Judge Glanville previously had ruled that she shouldn't be shown, and then that was kind of it. So Judge Whitaker is very reluctant, and I can understand why, because there's so many issues we litigated. I think she's just a little afraid of cracking that door open too much.
Yeah, I could see that, and I've had cases where we've gotten a new judge, and the judge has even indicated kind of that they thought the prior judge's ruling might not have been correct, or at least the new judge wouldn't have ruled the same way, but I'm not going to reconsider all of the old judge's rulings. And I do just want to throw out there, it's not really a question, but just a statement, some commentary to the audience is not only, of course, do you have several young men who are being locked up in the prime of their lives, in the prime of their career. These were platinum selling recording artists with families. They're now locked up. They're locked up in places that are really dangerous, quite frankly. A lot of these defendants are locked up in the Fulton County Jail. You could just Google Fulton County Jail at Rice Street, and most people know about the problems there. At least one of the defendants, I know Jeffrey Williams, is being housed at Cobb County Jail. I just saw an article in the AJC a day or two ago that an inmate was either stabbed or killed or both over the weekend at the Cobb County Jail. So these are really, really serious issues. And obviously, it'll be interesting to see if Judge Whitaker decides to reconsider her prior ruling. So to try to start wrapping up, we've talked so much about the length of this case. There's going to be a lot of lawyers listening. From a personal standpoint, from a practice management survival standpoint, how have you survived? Quite frankly, how have you survived being in this courtroom in one case? How has your practice been affected? What have you done to hopefully mitigate some of the effects of a trial like this?
Right. I mean, it's been, and it continues to be extraordinarily challenging. We have a couple of hundred other clients with cases pending. I've got 60 trials backed up that I need to do when this trial is over. And just staying afloat is obviously quite challenging. Jay Apt, who runs the firm, he is out there taking care of business, and it's one of the reasons that you see me in court 95% of the time and you don't see him there. So he's out there, he's handling the other clients along with Katie Hingerty. He is bringing in work. He is making sure that our firm survives this incredibly challenging period of time. And it's not just this trial. When this trial is over, then we have to go, deal with that backlog of cases. So we are going to be digging out of this trial for years when this is over. So professionally, financially, it's challenging. And then, just personally, it can be exhausting to be at trial for this long. I've never been at trial longer than a few weeks.
I mean, I don't know, Doug, that there are many people in the country, whatever type of law they practice, that can say they have been in a trial as long as you have, and it's not even over, like you said. So give your predictions. When I was Googling a little bit in preparation for this interview, I think there was a headline that said you had told the court at the rate that the case was going, you guys would be another year or so in trial. Realistically, with the new judge now, who seems to at least be trying to move things along a little better than the previous judge, how long do you think y'all have left?
Yeah, so what that was in March of this year, March of 2024, I filed a motion with the court to try to set a time limit on the state's case, citing all kinds of case law for support for that. And they had 700 witnesses on their witness list at the time. And if you just extrapolate it out, I think the headline came because 700 witnesses at the rate the state was going to be 2027. That was not hyperbole. That was just math. Hopefully that motion put some pressure on them. They reduced their witness list to a couple of hundred. Now we're down to roughly 100 or 120 left. I'm going to guess right now that we're looking at late spring of 2025, maybe early summer of 2025. Now that assumes that the judge does not take action. I suspect she's going to begin to take action. As I said earlier, I'm going to continue to put pressure on the state because, as I've told the courts, I don't say anything on these podcasts I don't say in court. As I've told the court, myself, but mostly the prosecutors, they live their life, they get their paycheck, they see their families. Presumably, they occasionally get a vacation in a little bit, not much. But the length of this case doesn't affect them, but it affects my client. So they have no incentive whatsoever to move with any degree of deliberate speed. And so that's why I think they need to be put on a clock. So if they're put on some kind of clock, if some pressure comes, maybe we'll finish up by the Super Bowl, but I am not hopeful because we still have our case to present.
So besides watching y'all, continuing to watch y'all, continuing to lend our support and good thoughts, is there anything that we can do, just me, the folks listening, to help you, to help the other defense lawyers, to help the defendants who we are watching day in and day out with their lives on the line at trial?
Not as much to directly help me, but as far as helping the defendants, I can tell everyone watching this, they get to see some social media while they're in the courtroom. They can see it on, for example, Diamante Kendrick can see it on my computer sometimes when I'm sitting there. And the outpouring of support that he sees on like the law and crime chat that scrolls up the side of the YouTube feed, the things that I'll occasionally show him on Twitter, all of that is great for trying to keep his spirits up because I don't think I could do what he has been doing, sitting at Rice Street, coming to court, and on the vast majority of days, still having a very good attitude and being able to deal with this. And I think the outpouring of support from the community is tremendously helpful to him. And I'll say things to the other defendants as well when I see that. When people say, wish Thug a happy birthday, I'll pass that on. So it's all great.
I saw Mr. Williams' dad, who I guess is Jeffrey Williams Sr., at a court hearing in Fulton County for another case that he just happened to be watching. And we talked a little bit afterwards, and I kind of gave him a hug and said, I've been watching, and I just know your son's going to be home. So please send that same message to Mr. Kendrick. Please congratulate him on having such a great lawyer. I really appreciate you being here, and we'll keep watching, and we're rooting for you.
Thank you, Scott. I've really enjoyed our conversation.